Simon Cowell, a name forever tied to television, to the discovery of voices that touch the world. Yet few would imagine that before becoming the most powerful figure in entertainment, he was once just an ordinary office clerk, quietly sitting behind a desk. His life reads like a dramatic journey, where an unknown man rose up and reshaped the music industry forever. With an uncanny ear for talent and a fearless honesty, he turned nobodies into legends, earning the title of television's golden eye. American Idol, The X Factor, Britain's Got Talent, all of them bear his mark, all of them birthed global superstars. Millions of dreams have been ignited through Simon's choices, millions of hearts have laughed, cried, and lived through music because of him. But behind the dazzling spotlight lies a very different Simon Cowell. A man wrestling with declining health, with persistent pain, and with a loneliness money could never erase. There were moments when he seemed on the verge of collapse, when fame and fortune could not fill the emptiness inside. The world praises his strictness, his sharpness, his brilliance, but few see the shadows he carries. Simon Cowell, the genius behind the glow, yet also a deeply fragile man behind the curtain. And it is this journey, with its triumphs and its silent struggles, that makes his story one the world will never forget. Before we begin, if Simon Cowell's shows have ever given you hope, moved you to tears, or made you laugh, leave a like as a way to honor the man who dedicated his life to bringing dreams to light. Behind the glamour of global fame lies a truth few dare to see, a childhood marked by emptiness and the absence of affection. Born in 1959 in Lambeth, London, Simon grew up in Elstree, Hertfordshire. His family appeared elegant on the outside, yet beneath the surface were wounds that shaped his soul. His mother, Julie Brett, a graceful ballet dancer, often kept an emotional distance. His father, Eric Selig Philip Cowell, a music executive and property developer, measured worth through discipline and achievement, but rarely offered warmth. Years later, Simon confessed, "My father never once told me he was proud of me, even when I needed it most." That absence, small to some, became a lifelong scar, haunting every room, every stage, and every silent night. School was no escape. At Radlett Preparatory and later Dover College, Simon wasn't the shining student his parents hoped for, but a restless boy, defiant of rules, clashing with teachers, and burdened by shame at never meeting expectations. His classmates were remembered, while Simon remained overlooked. Year after year, he was the boy present yet invisible. Barely passing English language and sociology with his GCE, he left school not with relief but with deep disappointment. In his family's world, excellence defined value, and Simon felt utterly worthless. By his late teens, rejection had become a familiar shadow, whispering the same verdict, "You're not good enough." Perhaps out of pity rather than pride, his father secured him a position in the mailroom at Emmy Music. At the very bottom of a vast entertainment empire, the young man took his first step on a grueling path, one that would eventually lead him to reshape the industry forever. Every morning, Simon Cowell quietly carried coffee to music producers who didn't even know his name. He sorted through fan letters for artists whose songs echoed across stadiums, while his own presence seemed to fade into nothing. "I became invisible in a world obsessed with the spotlight," he later confessed with painful honesty. Humiliated, he once left Emmy, but the world outside offered him nothing but further rejection. When hope collapsed, he returned to the very mailroom he despised. In those days, Simon often cried silently in the bathroom after work. His tears were not only for failure, but for the terrifying thought that his life had already peaked before it had even begun. And yet, among the ruins of humiliation, a new fire began to burn. The silence and indifference of his childhood had not destroyed him. They had forged him. From rejection, he learned defiance. From the absence of affection, he built an almost ruthless ambition. The boy who once wept in silence was slowly becoming the man who would demand the world's attention. His childhood was no fairy tale, but a harsh training ground, where every unspoken word of love became fuel for an unbreakable will. And with those scars carved deep inside, Simon stepped back into the music world, vowing he would no longer be invisible. Humiliated but unshaken, he returned to the Emmy mailroom, where stacks of records and unopened letters became his silent classroom, and where a visionary was being forged in the shadows. Simon Cowell did not just study music. He studied power, the way fame was built, the way stars were manufactured, and the way dreams could be sold. His path was not carved by natural talent, but by relentless grit and a refusal to let judgment over his shortcomings define the rest of his life. By the early 1980s, Simon dared to risk everything. Along with E.A. and Burton, he founded Fanfare Records. At first, it seemed like fortune was finally his. Glittering pop hits like So Macho by Sonita brought Simon, once invisible, into the spotlight. Parties, champagne toasts, handshakes from people who had once dismissed him. For the first time, he tasted the intoxicating sweetness of success. But champagne turns bitter quickly. Markets shifted, trends faded, and the empire he thought he was building crumbled almost overnight. By the end of the decade, the buzz had turned to silence, the offices stood empty, contracts were worthless. In his early 30s, Simon had nothing left but debt and despair. Friends vanished, creditors circled like vultures. Humiliation cut deep. He returned to his parents' house, retreating into the childhood bedroom that once echoed with loneliness, now whispering the curse of failure. To the world, it was just a failed business. To Simon, it was a personal devastation, as though the boy starved of affection had grown into a man stripped of dignity. Years later, he would admit those days nearly destroyed him. Once again, he felt invisible, haunted by a ghost that would not leave. It was a brutal reminder that in the entertainment world, victories are fragile, but cruelty endures. And yet, from those ashes, something fierce began to rise. Failure did not break Simon Cowell. It forged him. He began to study not just music, but the very architecture of fame. What made audiences fall silent? What made them erupt in cheers? What made them remember? Each humiliation, each sleepless night, each bitter taste of defeat became fuel for a man who would one day seize the throat of television and rewrite its rules. His career did not begin in glory. It began in ashes. And from those ashes, Simon Cowell stepped onto a path that would make him both worshipped and reviled. An empire born not of privilege, but of pain. At a merciless crossroads, he faced two choices: to be buried forever in obscurity, or to rise again and reclaim his place in the industry that had once devoured him. Simon Cowell's return to the music industry in the early 1990s was not a glorious comeback, but an act of pure survival. At BMG, he wasn't seen as a rising star, but as the man scarred by failure, whispered about in corridors as the one whose empire had collapsed before it even began. Every handshake carried suspicion, every glance carried an unspoken question: can this man ever really succeed? Stripped of illusions, Simon tore apart his pride and rebuilt his philosophy from the ground up. He abandoned the dream of chasing timeless artists. Instead, he saw the truth clearly: critics don't buy records, ordinary people do. Years later, he admitted, "I learned the hardest lesson: sell records first, respect comes later." That desperation fueled him. He signed acts that others mocked, names ridiculed by the industry. Yet they sold millions: groups like Five, the ballad duo Robson and Jerome, and boy bands like Westlife. Audiences adored them, bought their records, sang their songs, while the press sneered at Simon as cheap. Each success was tinged with bitterness, as he outsold the industry's darlings but was still dismissed as inferior. Yet hidden within that contempt was the most valuable lesson: fame was never about perfection, it was about connection. He turned rejection into his compass, tuning himself to the heartbeat of the crowd instead of the applause of insiders. Still, the road was lonely and steep. Behind every hit was a sleepless night. Behind every chart-topping single was the lurking fear that another collapse could take it all away. Later, Simon admitted, "There were nights when I lay awake, convinced I was about to lose everything again." That confession revealed the harshest truth: even his greatest victories were as fragile as smoke in the wind. In 2001, a new chapter opened for Simon Cowell. This time, he didn't remain hidden in the shadows of contracts or behind closed doors of the music industry. He stepped in front of the camera, facing millions of viewers with Pop Idol. Many doubted him. They thought he was too cold, too blunt, too sharp to be embraced by the public. Yet what critics called cruelty, the audience recognized as truth. His honesty wasn't meant to crush dreams, but to reveal real value in a world filled with illusions. His unapologetic words and fearless attitude transformed Pop Idol into a phenomenon. Viewers, tired of polite lies and empty compliments, found excitement in a voice unafraid to speak the truth. And soon, Simon Cowell's face became as familiar as the stars he was judging. Pop Idol was more than just a TV show. It was a turning point, a cultural revolution, reshaping how audiences saw talent and how the entertainment industry operated. For Simon, this was never a fairy tale paved with glory. From the humiliation of moving back into his parents' house to the bright lights of primetime television, his path was forged in struggle. A journey carved with scars, powered by resilience, and won through the courage to embrace truths others avoided. Pop Idol proved that years of failure, nights of fear, and the sting of mockery he endured were not in vain. They became the foundation for the empire he would one day lead. By the early 2000s, Simon Cowell was no longer the invisible boy in the mailroom or the failed businessman lost in despair. He had become the face of a new era of television entertainment. And Pop Idol made his name an icon. In 2002, when American Idol premiered, Simon Cowell's life transformed completely. Week after week, millions tuned in not only for the hopeful singers, but for his words. The raised eyebrow, the heavy silence, the brutally honest remarks, all became as iconic as the performances themselves. What others saw as cruelty, audiences recognized as rare honesty. Soon, Simon was the most talked about name on television. By the mid-2000s, with the X Factor and global influence, he was no longer just a music executive. He had become the keeper of dreams. A single compliment could launch a career, while one shake of the head could end it. At his peak, more than 600 million viewers across over 100 countries followed the shows bearing his name. The press called him the most powerful man in television. But power always comes at a price. The bluntness that built his empire also made him a target. He was booed in public, mocked in tabloids, painted as a villain. Years later, he admitted, "I know people hate me, but I can't pretend to be someone else." That honesty created an empire but also imprisoned him in constant controversy, a king on his throne, yet trapped in a lonely fortress. Behind the cameras, his schedule was relentless. Endless auditions, live shows, global branding, and the crushing responsibility of carrying an empire left little room for a personal life. Nights consumed by strategy meetings, days drowned in criticism. Too harsh, too commercial, too predictable, he heard it all. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. The applause of millions replaced intimacy, leaving him with silence in private. Friends drifted away, relationships crumbled, and the man who once longed for affection now longed only for peace. Simon confessed that even under the spotlight, with crowds cheering, he often felt utterly alone. A heartbreaking paradox, the man who gave millions their moment of recognition often ended his nights unnoticed. Yet in that crucible of pressure, the legend of Simon Cowell was forged, etched forever as proof of the true cost of fame. He didn't just change television, he redefined the relationship between fame and the audience. For the first time, viewers felt as though they were sitting right beside Simon Cowell, weighing decisions about who deserved to become a star and who did not. That role made him divisive, but also unforgettable. At the peak of his power, Simon achieved something that once seemed impossible. He was no longer invisible in the entertainment industry, he was its very heartbeat. The whole world was watching, yet behind the triumph lay exhaustion, loneliness, and a haunting question: had the empire he built cost him the very things he longed for most? Then, in February 2014, came another turning point. Simon held his newborn son in his arms for the first time. The cameras caught a rare smile, soft and genuine, but they could not capture the storm that child had silenced. For Simon, it was more than the moment of becoming a father. It was the rediscovery of a part of himself he thought had been lost, hidden beneath the blinding lights of fame and the endless weight of controversy. When Eric Cowell let out his first cry, Simon's world shifted forever. The baby was not just a child, but a fragile miracle, a lifeline handed to a man who had been standing in the ruins of one of the darkest chapters of his life. Just months earlier, in 2013, his carefully built empire seemed to collapse when news broke that Lauren Silverman, the wife of his close friend Andrew, was pregnant with his child. It was not mere rumor, but a firestorm that consumed everything. Headlines screamed betrayal. Tabloids dissected every detail. The man who once judged others now found himself the one being judged. The deepest pain did not come from the public outrage, but from the quiet abandonment of friends, the whispers that followed him into every room, the bitter truth that trust once broken is rarely repaired. Andrew Silverman filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity. Simon, once the symbol of confidence and control, longed only for invisibility. In a rare moment of honesty, he admitted, "It wasn't something I'm proud of." No excuses, no deflection, just regret. And yet, from that chaos, something unexpected emerged. When Eric was born, the story turned. From scandal, it became redemption. The man whose world revolved around contracts and ratings now lived for tiny hands and bedtime rituals. The shouting gave way to children's stories. The cold glare of stage lights was replaced by the warmth of fatherhood. Simon later confessed, "My priorities completely changed. Now, it's all about him." Those closest to him noticed immediately. One colleague recalled, Fatherhood saved him. Eric gave him a reason to stop, to heal. But redemption never comes without scars. Lost friendships, broken trust, and the lingering shadow of guilt remained. Simon admitted, "I lost friends. I lost trust. But I gained something I never knew I needed." To tabloids, it was just a scandal long past. To Simon, it was a scar that shaped him. What made his transformation so striking was its authenticity. It wasn't staged for cameras, but revealed in softer edges, in patience replacing harshness, in humility that success had never taught him. Fatherhood didn't erase the scandal, but gave it meaning. The fire that nearly destroyed him forged a new Simon, less arrogant, more vulnerable, and more human. And perhaps the most unforgettable part of it all is the gentle voice calling him Dad. A reminder that even the strongest are fragile, that mistakes carry their own value, and sometimes the light we need most doesn't come in spite of our failures, but because of them. Simon Cowell, the man whose words once held the attention of millions, faced a loss that no spotlight could ever heal. In 2015, while still learning the unfamiliar role of fatherhood, life struck him with a devastating blow. His mother, Julie Brett, passed away at the age of 89. To the world, it was a natural ending to a long life, but to Simon, it was an unfillable void. Julie was more than a mother. She was his anchor, the silent witness to his rebellions, failures, and impossible dreams. She was the one whose approval he craved most, even if rarely spoken aloud. And when she was gone, Simon walked away from deadlines and cameras, retreating into a grief no audience would ever see. Yet the pain of losing his mother also unearthed an older wound. His father, Eric, had died back in 1999. A stern but guiding presence, the man Simon longed to impress never lived to see his son rise from bankruptcy to global power. For years, Simon carried that regret in silence. Now, with both parents gone, he felt as though the final thread to his roots had been cut. Friends remembered how fragile he seemed then, how the unshakable figure on television fell into an uncharacteristic silence. He quietly admitted, "Losing my mum was the hardest thing I've ever been through." The silence afterward was unbearable. For a man who lived his life in applause, that silence was heavier than any criticism. And though he had just welcomed the miracle of fatherhood, cradling his son Eric in 2014, the joy was overshadowed by grief. It felt as though life had balanced itself cruelly, giving him a child while taking away his mother. Yet in the heart of sorrow, a change began. Simon started speaking more about family, about presence, about treasuring moments that fame often steals. Those who worked with him noticed new patience, a surprising gentleness, and a vulnerability he rarely showed before. Behind the sharp wit, the critical gaze, was still a son grieving not just his mother, but both parents, carrying scars of regret and gratitude. The loss did not break him, but it softened him, leaving a trace visible in his pauses and in the glimmer of his eyes whenever their names were mentioned. It was a reminder that even the most powerful man on television is, at the end of the day, just a son longing for his parents. Simon Cowell, at 60, when many dream of slowing down and enjoying peace, faced one of the darkest turning points of his life. In August 2012, in the yard of his Malibu home, Simon was testing a powerful new electric bike. In a split second of miscalculation, excitement turned into disaster. The crash shattered his back in several places, a moment he later recalled with a shiver. "In just 1 minute, I nearly lost everything." 6 hours of surgery, a steel rod implanted in his spine, and a chilling warning: one wrong move could leave him unable to walk forever. The man once towering in authority on the judge's chair now lay helpless, struggling even to lift a glass of water. The spotlights were gone, replaced by the cold beeps of machines tracking his breath and heartbeat. Each sound reminded him how close he had come to silence forever. Simon had weathered scandals and heartbreak before, but this was different. This was survival. Nights became endless torture, broken only by brief sleep induced by medicine. Yet the greatest pain wasn't physical. It was the fear of leaving behind his 6-year-old son, Eric, who adored him unconditionally. That fear became his fuel. "I thought of Eric, and I knew I had to fight," he admitted. No longer was it about ratings or empire, but about bedtime stories, Lego castles, and the chance to hold his son again without scars or wires. Recovery was brutal. Even turning in bed felt like climbing a mountain. Friends saw him pale and fragile, but beneath the weakness still burned the fire that had carried him from a mailroom to global fame. Slowly, painfully, he took his first steps again. Each step was a victory over despair. And at his side, Eric cheered him on, holding his hand, reminding him why survival mattered. It was not just the healing of a body, but the rebirth of a father's heart. In August 2012, Simon Cowell faced the darkest nightmare of his life after a brutal fall from an electric bike that shattered his back. 6 hours of surgery, a steel rod implanted in his spine, and endless days of agony haunted him. Yet when it seemed fate had stepped aside, early in 2022, tragedy struck again. Another electric bike accident left Simon with a broken arm and a bruised face. Though not as life-threatening as before, the humiliation cut deep. Once again, he found himself in a hospital gown, covered in stitches and scars, while headlines mocked him as reckless, fragile, even foolish. For Simon, the physical pain was sharp, but the deeper wound was psychological. It felt as if fate itself was taunting him, reminding him that control was nothing more than an illusion. To be knocked down once is tragedy. To be struck twice feels like punishment. And yet, he refused to surrender. Later, Simon admitted, "It changed me in every possible way." Both accidents became mirrors, forcing him to reflect on his frantic pace, sleepless nights, and endless hunger for power and fame. He realized that none of it mattered without health, without family, without tomorrow. When Simon returned to the public eye, the world no longer saw only the harsh judge who terrified contestants. They saw a man marked by mortality, reshaped by humility and gratitude. Perhaps that's why these accidents remain the darkest chapters of his story. Because in a single moment, the untouchable mogul twice found himself silenced, fearful, and weak. But from that silence, he discovered a new voice. A voice not forged in ratings or power, but in survival, fatherhood, and the brutal truth that even legends must fall, suffer, and rise again. By his 60s, Simon Cowell carried scars, on his body, in his soul, and across his career. Yet none of them defined his end, for he had mastered the art of standing tall after the hardest falls. That day, no one imagined that Simon Cowell, the man who once made millions tremble with a single frown, would one day tremble before his own reflection. It wasn't the scar from a bike accident, nor the grief of losing his mother, but the mark carved onto his own face. Not by fate, but by his own hand, through needles and fillers, in a desperate attempt to preserve youth under the harshest spotlight of all, television. At first, the changes were subtle, almost invisible. But as the years passed, the mask began to crack. By 2021, fans were stunned. The familiar smirk, the sharp gaze, now replaced by an unfamiliar, swollen look. Headlines erupted, memes spread mercilessly. Simon Cowell, what happened to his face? The man who judged others now found himself judged. Ironically, he had built an empire on control. And yet, here he was, unable to control the most personal thing of all, his own reflection. In rare interviews, Simon admitted, "I went too far. There was a moment I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself." It wasn't an excuse, but a painful truth. Behind the spotlight, he began to retreat. Less TV, fewer contracts, more time with Eric, his little son. "I just want to be there when he laughs," he said. But the cameras never stopped. Paparazzi followed, tabloids speculated. For the first time, Simon truly felt what it meant to be the object instead of the observer. The power had flipped. The judge had become the judged. Yet from that humiliation came clarity. Simon stopped. No more Botox. No more fillers. Let time leave its mark. It was more than an aesthetic choice, it was a peace treaty with himself. When he returned to the public eye, it wasn't with the polished image of artificial youth, but with the authenticity of a man who had survived public ridicule and chosen honesty over illusion. And for the first time, people no longer saw arrogance, but humanity. Fragile, imperfect, real. Perhaps that is Simon Cowell's greatest legacy, a reminder that no one is immune to time, and that true courage lies not in chasing eternal youth, but in accepting the truth of aging. In recent years, Simon Cowell had imagined the autumn of his life as something quieter, filled with fatherhood, reflection, and moments of peace with his young son. But tragedy struck in the most unexpected way. Liam Payne, the boy Simon first met at 16 years old under the bright stage lights, carrying a voice full of promise, was suddenly gone at just 31. A tragic fall ended a life that had only just begun, leaving millions of fans around the world stunned. Yet for Simon, the pain was far beyond words. Liam was not just another star, not just another name in a long list of talents. Liam was family. A son in spirit. A piece of One Direction, the band Simon had carefully built in 2010, one that became a cultural phenomenon and defined a generation. He never imagined that the simple yes he gave at that first audition would lead to a journey cut so cruelly short. Simon had endured loss before, his father's passing, his mother's farewell, even his own near-fatal accident. But this loss was different. It was sudden, brutal, unnatural. It stole the future, leaving behind unfinished songs, unspoken laughter. While the world lit candles, prayed together, and flooded social media with lyrics and memories, Simon retreated into silence. His project stopped. The cameras turned off. Nights once filled with studio lights became hours of quiet with his son Eric, whom he now held closer than ever. Friends noticed he seemed to pour into Eric all the moments Liam would never get to experience. In private, Simon revisited old tapes, blurry audition clips, youthful laughter. What once felt nostalgic now carried the weight of grief. Each sound a wound. Each song a shadow of what could have been. He, the man who had built empires and created stars, now faced the one ending he could not rewrite. From that grief, a change emerged. Simon no longer spoke of ratings or empires. Instead, he spoke of legacy, of family, of presence. His once sharp voice softened, touched with the awareness of life's fragility. Liam's death became more than sorrow. It became a mirror, reflecting back to Simon the price of fame, the brevity of life, and the truth that even the brightest lights can vanish without warning. One Direction was never just a band. They were youth, unity, hope. And when Liam left, a part of that symbol shattered forever. But in the emptiness, Simon held on tighter to what remained, Eric's laughter, the sacred stillness of everyday life. He realized that no empire, no success, no spotlight could outweigh this fragile truth: we only have one life, fleeting and irreplaceable. In 2025, Simon Cowell is no longer the ruthless man who once ruled Saturday night television, but someone shaped by survival, pain, and reflection. At 65, he still sits on the Got Talent judging panel, yet no longer to dominate, but to guide and encourage. His once sharp tongue has softened, each word now carries the patience of someone who understands how fragile life can be. Every smile hides the shadow of past struggles, every piece of advice carries echoes of sleepless nights and physical pain. His $15.5 million Beverly Hills mansion, once a trophy of success, has become a sanctuary where health comes first. Each morning begins with slow Pilates to protect his spine fractured in 2020, where every careless movement risks reigniting unbearable pain. Meals are no longer lavish but carefully planned with doctors: less salt for blood pressure, more fiber against diabetes, antioxidants to fight fatigue. Each bite is a choice between healing and hurt. Yet his greatest challenge is not his back, but his eyes. Decades under stage lights, coupled with scars of past trauma, have dimmed his vision. Reading glasses are constant companions. For the man who built an empire spotting hidden talent, blurred vision feels like betrayal. What he fears most is the thought of one day not being able to see his son Eric's face clearly. And so, evenings with Eric have become his greatest medicine. Bike rides along Malibu's coast, clumsy piano notes, bedtime stories read with effort but full of love, these are the moments that matter most. Each laugh from Eric is a promise, each turned page a challenge thrown back at time itself. Meanwhile, his empire still thrives. Got Talent, The X Factor, and global franchises continue to generate millions. He owns a $24 million Malibu beach house, a $45 million London estate, and a Manhattan penthouse. His garage holds dozens of supercars and a private jet, though most now gather dust, silent monuments to a man who once raced against time but has finally slowed down. Simon has already drafted his will. Eric will not inherit billions. Instead, much of it will fund healthcare for children, creative education, and scholarships for disadvantaged youth. "I don't want Eric to inherit money," Simon once said. "I want him to inherit values, and I want other children to inherit the opportunities I never had." Even his appearance tells the story. No more Botox, no desperate chase for youth. His frame is leaner, his hair silver, his face lined with wrinkles. "I've stopped chasing youth," he admitted. "I'd rather chase memories with Eric." Each wrinkle now marks survival, not vanity. Today, Simon rarely appears on TV. His focus is on charity concerts, scholarships, and nurturing new talent. His success is no longer measured by ratings, but by simpler victories: reading under dim light, waking each morning to face pain, and turning wealth into opportunities for others. Simon Cowell is no longer the ruthless judge, but a father, a teacher, a survivor rewriting the meaning of legacy. His life whispers a universal truth: fame fades, health declines, fortune slips away, but love, humility, and purpose endure. And so, dear listener, his story turns toward you. What lesson will you take? To slow down before fate forces you to? To treasure laughter over applause? To invest not in wealth, but in presence? He had stumbled, he had made mistakes, he had faced judgment under the harsh eyes of the world. Yet perhaps that is what makes his journey worth remembering. Because legacy is not measured by flawless victories, but by the courage to rise again after falling, by the strength to keep walking even when the heart is shattered. Simon Cowell has shown us something essential, that true power does not lie in fame or empires, but in the ability to love despite the pain of loss. Every scar, every heartbreak is not just a mark of failure, but proof of life, proof that one has dared to love, to hope, to risk it all. When he fell silent, some thought his light had dimmed. Yet in that silence, a deeper truth was revealed. That truth is empathy. For the greatest legacy Simon leaves behind is not television shows, not music empires, but the reminder that humans are at their most powerful when they embrace their own fragility and imperfection. Share your thoughts below. Subscribe to uncover the untold chapters. And let us honor not just the legends, but the fragile, imperfect, and profoundly human spirit within them all.